Hi, everyone. So we're going to go ahead and get started with this webinar today. First, I'll introduce myself. My name is Emily Bango. I'm a senior consultant focused on monitoring, evaluation, and learning for HVFC, and I'll be your host for this webinar, Defining and Measuring Impact. And presenting with me today is my colleague, Martin Mulder. And yeah, here we are. So welcome, everybody. We're very happy to have you here and to see so much enthusiasm for today's topic, which is, as I mentioned, defining and measuring impact. As the project description states, in this course, HVFC will explain the different techniques that organizations can use to define what impact means for their organizations and their programs and projects, and how impact can best be measured and how you can communicate on it with relevant people inside and outside your organization. Participants will share their own challenges with defining and measuring impact, and HVFC will provide tips to address common challenges. Overall, by the end of this session, we hope that you have learned how to better define impact to establish a common definition for your organization, and how to establish organizational processes to measure your project and organization level impact. So for those of you who aren't already familiar, let's start with a brief introduction of HVFC. We are an international development-focused consulting firm with offices in the Netherlands and the United States. Our consultants are from many different countries and have a range of experiences and expertise. Our services include three interconnected pillars: fundraising, monitoring, evaluation, and learning, which I'll call during the rest of this webinar MEL, and recruitment. And this webinar falls under our MEL pillar. So our MEL pillar consists of services under each of the three categories: monitoring, evaluation, and learning. We provide technical assistance, conduct evaluations, facilitate trainings, and develop tools for clients to support improving organizational processes and practices to increase impact. This is the first webinar of a series of 3 free webinars that we introduce our MEL pillar. The topics and dates of the 2 webinars will be Capturing Success Stories on July 21st, and Project Design for Winning Proposals on August 4th. And you'll see some more details on that at the end of this webinar and also in a follow-up that we'll send. Before we start, just some practical issues. First, if you have any questions during the webinar, you can ask these through the chat on the right corner. When possible, we will answer these questions directly, but likely it won't be until the end of the session. We'll have a Q&A. The webinar will be uploaded to our YouTube channel in the course of this week. On this YouTube channel, you can also watch previous webinars and Q&A sessions. Last but not least, we will have a special surprise gift for you that we reveal at the end of this webinar, so stay tuned. As a spoiler, if you did participate in the previous Impact webinar that Martin presented, it's going to be similar. So now I'm going to pass it over to Martin. Who are you and what is your role within HVFC?
Thanks, Emily, for your introduction. Yes, as Emily said, my name is Martin Mulder. I work with HVFC since the start of 2019. Previously, I worked in the development sector, both for the government as well as for an implementing charity. Actually, 2 different implementing charities over the last 10 years. And now I'm offering the experience that I gained over these years as a consultant towards other charities. I work within HVFC in the MEL pillar, but also in the fundraising pillar. So my work covers two of the three pillars, and sometimes also a combination between the two, because as we all know, fundraising and monitoring and evaluation are closely related. And within my work, I have a particular focus on impact. Some of you might have seen the other webinar that I presented 2 weeks ago, which was a general introduction on impact. And now for this particular MEL pillar, we are going to dive deeper into the first two steps of impact on defining and measuring impact. The reason that I'm so interested in impact is that I feel that trying to maximize impact as a charity, as a non-governmental organization, is basically the highest achievement that you can reach. So it is important to raise as much funds as possible, as I will definitely support you with in case of our fundraising consultancy. But other than that, I feel that it's most important to reach as much as possible additional value with the funds that you raised, because otherwise maybe the fundraising has been in vain. So that is what motivates me to dive deep into the impact topic, and that's how I accumulated a lot of knowledge, which I hope to share with you today during this webinar. So I think that's about me. Maybe Emily, we can also learn about some specifics of our crowd.
Absolutely, yes. So thank you, Martin, for that introduction. We also want to learn about you. So we're going to put up a quick poll. You'll have to scroll down a little bit because there are a few different questions, but we'd love for you to answer so we can find out who's joining us today. Great. We guys, just another minute or two. Looks like we're getting lots of responses in. Great. We just have a few more that we're waiting for.
Yeah, maybe in the meantime we can start sharing the results.
Sure.
See if we can identify some trends of the people participating today. Can you put up the results?
Yeah, I think I have to. I would need to end voting to do that.
Yeah.
So
I think it's good to proceed.
Cool. All right. So here we go. Where are you located? We have a good amount in Europe. The next is Africa, a few from Asia, also in North America. Role within the organization. Oh, I like this. We have management, fundraising, programming, and monitoring and evaluation. And
It's interesting,
also,
actually.
Selected other. That's really exciting.
It's interesting to see that actually we have more fundraising crowd than monitoring and evaluation. So let's see how we can combine the two during the during the discussion.
Yeah, I'm happy to see that too. Need as many people interested in MEL as possible.
And then we have a relatively large amount of smaller organizations, and then like 20% of them between 1 and 5 million, and 20% between 5 and 25 million euros. So I'm also curious to find out which of these bigger organizations, whether they have different experience with measuring impact, but we'll get back to that during the rest of the webinar.
Yeah.
So I think it's time to move to the general introduction. As I said already, we are focusing on the first two steps of the impact journey. This is a journey that we developed within HVFC to indicate what different steps have to take place for you to fully mainstream impact in your organization. And as you can see, not all steps are in serial sequence. Some of the steps can be done at the same time. Step one is mainly the starting point of working on impact, is defining the desired impact of your organization. And then it can be followed by starting to measure your impact, and then obviously also showing your impact to the outside world as step three. But at the same time, you can also start to increase your impact as soon as you have defined it as step four. And step five, a very obvious step but often forgotten, is to mainstream impact within the organization. But today, let's focus on step one and two, because they are most related to monitoring and evaluation. And while diving into these two steps, it might be good to first get an impression on what actually we mean with impact, because impact is used in a lot of different settings, in a lot of with a lot of different connotations to different people. So before I explain what I mean with impact, maybe it's good to go to a small poll to see what you would perceive as impact. So over to you, Emily.
Yeah. So we have just one question here. You can select multiple options, but the question is, which of the following examples describes impact?
So if you read the sentence and you feel, wow, this is impact, then click that one. You can click all 5 of them if you want to, or only pick one or several.
So we'll give you maybe another 15 seconds to complete this. Trust your instincts here.
Mm-hmm.
All right. I'm going to go ahead and share some of these results too.
Yep, curious. All right. So with regards to the vaccination, I think roughly 1 out of 4 participants indicated that as an example of impact. The second one, which is a bit strange because it refers to a very, very, very tiny reduction of sea level rise. It has been labeled by almost 2/3 as related to impact. Then the third one, only by 5%. Yesterday, our CEO was interviewed live on national television. The fourth one, the contribution or the addition of sustainable cities to one of the SDGs by 1/3 of the crowd. And then the last one, roughly by half, we contributed to the 5% reduction in meat consumption in Belgium with our campaigns that promote a vegan lifestyle. What I found interesting here, Emily, is that at least every sentence is mentioned at least once. And I could imagine this third option about the CEO that was interviewed, that one colleague mentions to the other, have you heard that our CEO was interviewed live on national television? That was big impact. So even when we feel that we do not mean impact in the more technical way, people might have a connotation of impact with that. And I think also the first one, which was not ticked too much, you could imagine an NGO saying our impact was huge. We vaccinated 1.5 million children in Pakistan. So you can see that even if we feel that this does not relate to impact, people might use the word impact to describe the actual achievement. And another interesting thing is that about the cook stove program, the second one, which is I think the least sexy one, and also sounds or feels like the least contribution, was labeled as impact by most people. So it also shows that impact is not always sexy, and also that something that is sexy is not always impact. So it's good that you acknowledge that as a crowd. And I think we can give some more structure to what is impact and what is not impact by showing this graph. This sequence from inputs through activities to outputs, outcome, and impact. I think this is familiar to most of you, also considering how you answered the poll. And actually, the first part, the blue part, relates to the how. Then the middle part, the outputs and outcomes, is what do we want? What do we want to achieve with these inputs? And then the last part, often forgotten, what for? Why are we going to set all these changes in motion? What is it that we actually want to achieve? And then the answer could be a reduction in sea level rise. And the answer will not be to be on television, because that's an output of a certain activity and not an impact. So if with this picture in mind, it's easier to judge the different compositions of the poll and to label them as either outputs, outcomes, and impact. And it's good to realize that many people, the general public, but also many of your colleagues, will keep referring to outputs and outcomes as being impact, because impact is a word that is not restricted to the technical sense that we now show in this picture. Impact is a quite frequently used word that people use to refer to all kinds of results of activities. But it's good to realize that impact, as we discuss it during this hour and also in a follow-up of the impact journey, is related to this orange part of the graph that we are currently showing. And maybe in a bit more fluid way, this is a picture I found on the internet that quite well describes the different spheres that an organization works in. They are resembled in the red circles. So first there is the sphere of control, in which you operate your activities, resulting in certain outputs. Then there's the sphere of direct influence, where these outputs are materialized, and the sphere of indirect influence, the third red circle, it's still something that you have set in motion, but you're not directly influencing it. That's the level of the outcomes. And then the sustained changes, the outermost sphere, the sphere of interest, is where you can achieve your impact. And interestingly enough, this sphere of interest is actually out of your control and even out of your influence, but it should be the sphere that you are most interested in. So I wanted to show this picture to indicate that although the result might be further away from what you can control as an organization, in the end, it's what most matters. And therefore, it's important that we only label results that are related to this sphere of interest as impact results. All right.
Martin, based on that information, could you, where the poll that we put out and the options. Could you tell us which ones would be considered impact, thinking about the sphere of influence?
Yes, maybe we can go quickly back to that poll results. Can you put them on the screen? Mm-hmm. Yes, I think actually the 1.5 million children in Pakistan is just an output, because the activity is to vaccinate children, and then the output resembles how many of them have you vaccinated, and also where. So an outcome would be that these children are better resistant against certain diseases, because this output statement doesn't refer to the effectiveness of the vaccine, whether it actually works, for what kind of disease they were vaccinated. Is it a disease that is common in Pakistan? So all that kind of information should be captured in an outcome. And then the impact is that these children live healthy lives, because they do not fall ill because of these vaccinations. So it looks like an impactful statement, but it's only one step towards a potential impact. And the second one, indeed, as it is less sexy, it is definitely on the impact level, because if it would say we have handed out so many cook stoves, that would be an output. If it would have said we have avoided so many trees to be cut because we have handed out the cook stoves, that's an outcome. But actually, why are you going to be working on these cook stoves? It's not because the cook stoves themselves are relevant to you. They might be relevant to you for other outcomes or impact, but in this case, the impact that people want to achieve is to reduce the negative effects of climate change. One of those negative effects is sea level rise. So you can calculate how many tons of CO2 reduction you achieve with people changing their cooking habits to cook stoves. And then this CO2 emission reduction can be related to a certain amount of sea level rise. And that's what happened here. So less sexy, but definitely on impact level. Now, the third one, most people got that is just an output. If this interview of the sea was perceived positively and people start changing their behavior, for example, on the topic that was discussed on television, then it can become an outcome. And if the change in behavior actually leads to positive results in the well-being of these people or other people that are affected by these behavior changes, then you could label it an impact. Most people got that, I guess. Then the fourth one is again tricky, because including a topic to one of the SDGs, it's not an impact. It only becomes impactful if actually the 17 SDGs become a relevant topic of politics, and if actually countries start to contribute to improve sustainable cities program as a result of this. So again, impact is still far away in this fourth example. And in the fifth example, I don't have a clear answer, because I think 5% reduction in meat consumption in Belgium is close to an impact. Maybe a more appropriate level of impact would be that this 5% reduction of meat consumption also reduces animal suffering in the bioindustry of meat production. So it's somewhere between a long-term outcome and an impact. And another thing that makes this one questionable is that these campaigns that promote a vegan lifestyle might have contributed to a reduction in meat, but you would need additional information to see into what extent that contribution was there, and what would have happened with the meat consumption if this particular campaign would have not taken place. So in this case, the contribution versus attribution aspect also plays a role, but we'll get back to that later in the presentation. Great. So moving to define an impact, I think these examples already give a good overview of what I wanted to present in my next slide. And that is that it's very important to find the right level of scale when defining impact. I think the examples of the poll clearly show that if you set your ambition on an output or outcome level, you're not yet at the correct level of impact. But also otherwise, if you set your impact statement on a too high level of scale, like we want world peace and prosperity for all people from now until forever, that's too far away from what you can achieve as an organization. So you have to find somewhere in the middle, the sweet spot of impact that your organization can actually logically contribute to. And I think this fifth example of this vegan lifestyle campaign is a tricky one, because the actual meat reduction might be too far away from the potential contribution from this particular organization, depending, of course, on the size of the campaign, which was not defined here. But it feels that this impact statement or desired impact was a bit too far off from what the organization could realistically achieve. So then you have to go one step down and make it a bit more tangible. To further illustrate this, we have come up with three different examples of defining impact. The first one from the service delivery sector, a significant part of the development sector, directly focusing on improving the lives and well-being of people through education, economic improvement, etc. We took an example from the American NGO ACDI VOCA, who state that they try to foster broad-based economic growth, raise living standards, and create vibrant communities. So out of all these livelihood assets of people, they picked out the economic livelihood assets and the vibrant communities as their desired impact. But it's often said that it's relatively easy to define your impact as an overall development organization, but it can become more complicated if you are working in a right-based field, for example, in journalism. Trying to put up the next slide. Because then you're not directly contributing to the well-being of people, but you're rather contributing to certain enabling environments within society that indirectly feed back to these people. So then, as a journalist organization, if your impact statement would be to contribute to the well-being of people, it would be too much indirect, and nobody would recognize the activities of the organization in that impact statement. So as an example, we took the theory of change of Internews, and on the bottom you can see that their impact statement consists of several phrases: greater freedom of expression and access to information, increased knowledge and understanding around official development issues, improved environment for informed decision-making and action, and increased civic participation and progress towards the SDGs. So these are definitely high level. This is not something that you can directly achieve with doing one or two interventions. So it's not output or outcome level. But at the same time, it's not too high over to lose touch with the nature of the organization. And a third example, also from the right-based area, more related to governance and democracy organization. It's from the American organization NDI. Emily, you know what the abbreviation stands for, I guess?
Yeah, it's the National Democratic Institute.
Yes, and they indicate on their website that they promote openness and accountability in government by building political and civic organizations, safeguarding election and promoting citizen participation. So again, in this example, you see that it's on a high level scale because, for example, safeguarding elections, it's not something that you do overnight with one single intervention. So it's definitely on impact level. It's why you do what you do. But it's still related to the nature of the organization and doesn't become too high. So in addition to these organizational examples of impact definition, we also provided some program or project level examples to indicate how defining your impact can take shape on a program or project level. Ideally, according to me, organizations should have an organizational impact statement, which then can be derived towards program or project level. And for example, for a development organization, it can look as follows. I've made a screenshot of the website of the Dutch organization CIMAVI, of the generic information of their RETU program. And they say, as expected impact, improved health and well-being of girls between 10 and 13 years in a certain region in Bangladesh. So probably their impact statement as an organization is the improved health and well-being of people in general. Now for this project, they narrowed it down towards girls in a certain age bracket, in a certain region, in a certain country. So it's still connected to the generic organizational impact statement, but it's broken down into something that is capturable and also measurable, which we get to later, in the context of this project. Another example comes again from Internews, where we also showed the organizational level desired impact. Maybe Emily, I think you know this project. Maybe you can elaborate a bit on the example that we provide here on program level impact.
Sure. Yeah. So this report was a result of, or the screenshot of this report that you're seeing was a result of a randomized control trial that Internews implemented in Liberia. And their work involved covering debates and other media coverage around the election. And they were able to demonstrate that voter turnout was increased through the media coverage and through the debates. So in that sense, that is contributing to increased access to information, which informs decision making of individuals and can increase informed participation in society.
Okay, and maybe the next example is also something you can elaborate on because it refers back to NDA.
Sure. Yeah. So. Yeah, so this is another initiative. This is that NDI contributes to, and within this initiative, the Global Legislative Openness Conference and programming, members of government receive training to improve understanding of good governance practices, including collaboration with civil society. Which leads to more transparency and inclusion. So NDI is able to demonstrate that there are increases in collaboration between parliament officials, government officials, and individuals and members of civil society, which contributes to strengthening of good governance and the development of open, responsive legislative institutions, which contributes to their overall impact.
Yes, and Emily, I recall that we recently had a discussion on my assumption or my preference that impact trickles down from the organizational level to the project level. And then you indicated that you also know from experience that in some cases it goes the other way around. That people first have a certain project or program that they are going to define their impact, maybe because of its donor need, maybe because the project manager involved tries to raise the bar with regards to measurement, and then try to mainstream that project or program level impact towards the entire organization. So maybe it's interesting to check in the next poll how the different participants see this sequencing of organization level impact versus project level impact.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're going to ask another question here. How far are you at defining impact in your organization? So this is, speaking to the ways that organizations can develop and establish their impact, and how you feel that your organization is doing along this journey.
Maybe as people are checking their answers, I saw that a question came in related to what is impact and what is not impact, and I can already briefly reflect on that. The question indicates that imagine that an organization's aim is to vaccinate people. Then the statement about vaccinating 1.5 million people is impact. That is the statement of the person asking the question. Actually, I don't agree with this, because I don't think that the actual aim of an organization can be to vaccinate people. I cannot imagine an organization that has as a mission statement, we want to vaccinate people, and as a vision statement, we want a world with vaccinated people. Because always then the question appears, why do you want to vaccinate people? And there's a proper answer to that question, because we want people to live a healthy life. So actually, this vaccination is always a means to an end. And as long as you are reporting results that are actually a means to an end, then I wouldn't say it's impact. Although the organization might believe themselves that that is their reason of existence, then probably they have to do some soul searching and answer the question, why do we vaccinate people? Imagine that this vaccination is worthless, that research will find out that vaccinating people does not make sense. Do they still continue to vaccinate people because it's the purpose of their organization? Probably not. Sooner or later, they will find out that it's also useless to vaccinate people if the vaccination doesn't work. So I think that a pitfall here is that people might believe that the purpose of what they're doing is actually on output and outcome level, and think it's impact. The second example of the person asking the question, that lowering climate change or reducing climate change might be the impact goal of the organization, and in that case the actual sea level rise is not what they're aiming for. I can understand that, because there are other potential consequences of climate change that these interventions do not measure when measuring sea level rise, and there might also be other reasons for sea level rise that are not related to cook stove programs or climate change. So the second part of the question, I feel that further narrow down of your definition of what part of climate change do you want to tackle and why would be needed there.
Great. Thank you, Martin. And while you were just responding to that, we've had a few responses to how far are you with defining impact for your organization. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to share those results. All right. So great news that no one selected, we have not yet started to define our desired impact. So that's positive.
Yeah.
We're seeing that slightly more have defined desired impact at an organizational level, but not yet at program and project. Then defined our desired impact for some of our programs, but not yet on an organizational level. That was just 2 individuals. And 4 that stated that they have defined desired impact on both organization and project level.
Yeah, and I think the final one is also interesting. That like 20% of people says that they define it on both levels and they do connect. I think then you're in a good place. Then you are ready for the next part of measurement. But the final one is interesting to see why they don't connect well. And I think if you feel that they don't connect well on program and organization level, it's good to start with redefining your impact and organization level and work your way down, because you can only make the connection right if everything comes together on a shared organization level impact statement. And also for your measuring, which we will touch upon from now, it's relevant to have an impact indicator on organizational level that all your programmatic impact indicators can relate to, because otherwise there is nothing to connect the different impact attempts on program level. So it's good to start on organization level. On measuring impact, we have provided a few examples also for service delivery oriented organizations, but also for right-based organizations on what is important about measuring impact. For service delivery oriented organizations, particularly for health oriented organizations, the so-called DALI, disability adjusted life year, is a frequently used impact indicator. And it measures how much healthy life you will save with a particular intervention. And one of the consequences of this is that it might be much more worthwhile to cure diseases for babies or infants than to cure diseases for already old people. Because if you cure an infant and it will not die as a result of your intervention, you will gain decades of healthy life years, whereas that will be different for a person that's already 80 years old. So this is a quite common example from the service delivery sector. And then from the journalism sector, for example, you can indicate this is the free press index. I think the darker the country, the less press freedom there is. So this index has a certain ranking, a rating behind it, composing of different components. And if you're an organization active in journalism, probably your aim is to increase the score on this index in the sense that press freedom is going to be stronger. So you can pick either parts of this index or the entire index as your indicator to work towards. And similarly, if you work on good governance in civil society, there is this civic space monitor of the organization Civicus that tracks the civic space freedom. And if you have interventions related to freedom of speech, of the possibility to gather as civil society and to protest and lobby against government, then this is your go-to indicator. It's not a surprise that the countries with low scores on this indicator also have low scores on the free press indicator, so they are related. So these are two examples of more right-based indicators. All right, going to some suggestions on how you can improve the measuring of your impact. Measuring of impact is always related to your impact statement. So you have to find an appropriate impact indicator that resembles the achievement that you want to have. So as we said in the example of journalism, is if your purpose is to improve press freedom, find an indicator that suits that impact statement. So in that case, step 1 and 2 are very much connected, and you can't actually start measuring your impact if you haven't defined it properly, as was already indicated in the flowchart that we showed in the beginning of the webinar. Another thing that's good to realize is that it takes a lot of time to gather the appropriate data, particularly because you measure on impact level. Sometimes your impact horizon is 5 years, 10 years, maybe an entire generation. So also to measure change on that level requires more time than to collect your output and outcome results. So don't make it a 1 or 2 year ambition to measure your impact, make it a 5 to 10 year ambition, but start now, because if you start now, you can have concrete impact measurement result in the next 5 to 10 years. So it's good to start it up and then not be too um, uh, ambitious in when to expect your results. And also, as we said before, relate the impact indicators to the current program. So make sure that the current programs contribute to the indicators that you want to improve, so that because you can develop a very strong and solid impact measurement framework and at the same time realize that it doesn't measure the actual achievements of your activities. So always be sure that it's not only an appropriate measurement system, it's also measuring the things that you want to change. So make sure that they are always in touch. And another important suggestion is that it's not needed with regards to impact measurement to invent everything yourself. Try to see what's already there. We already provided some examples of existing impact indicators. So borrow from other organizations in your field. Try to link up with academics that have a lot of knowledge about the sector. Get inspired by the SDGs and all their sub goals. All of these have indicators. I think there are more than 160 sub goals under the SDGs, all of them with indicators. Probably 1 or 2 of these indicators might relate to your work. So it's better to borrow strong indicators than to develop weak indicators yourself. And an additional advantage of borrowing indicators is that others have also thought about how to measure them. So you can also borrow the measurement techniques and maybe even borrow data that you can use for your own impact measurement. And also, like I said, don't do it alone. Work together with academics and other people in the sector. You can also obviously hire external expertise, because impact measurement is a field in itself. So you don't need to have everything in-house in order to be able to get your impact data there. And it needs no further explanation that we are happy to support you there. But also try to see what kind of support you need and whether we or other consultants can facilitate you in that. And last but not least, do realize that the whole impact journey and measurement of impact is an iterative process. Because while measuring your impact, you might realize that your impact definition was not correct, because maybe you're measuring no results on your current impact definition. So after a few years, you have to realize that you will have to adapt your impact statement and adapt your measuring framework accordingly. So don't get frustrated if this first cycle of iteration doesn't bear fruit for you, and realize and be open to the fact that it will take continuous adjustments and adaptations before you are able to properly measure the actual impact that you make. And it's not something that you can master within a limited amount of time. It will take time to evaluate. Over to you, Emily.
Yeah, and Martin, I'll just add to that. Once you have your organization is feeling comfortable with the definition of the impact that you are looking to achieve, as well as the measurement, and you feel confident in that measurement, there is a likelihood that over years that will also need to be adjusted. So keep in mind that there's iteration in the establishment of a comprehensive definition, impact, and effective measurement techniques. And that also over time that it'll be important to revisit that as an organization and reflect on what has changed since the impact statement was established, and to figure out if there are changes or adjustments to that statement that the organization is ready to make. So thank you so much, Martin, for that. We did want to, we have a couple of more polls. We also want to have a Q&A. If there are any other questions that you have pending, please, you can add that to the chat. But we did want to ask in another poll about what other tools or support you think you might need you think you would need in order to better measure your impact as an organization. So we'd love to hear from you all after Martin's very great explanation of the definitions and measurement techniques. With your reflection, what else do you think your organization needs?
Yeah, and you can indicate multiple bottlenecks if that's the case for your organization.
Yeah, and it's speaking to some of the different types of iteration that I've at least seen in my experience working with clients is that sometimes a solicitation or a request from a potential donor or current donor can also cause some of that internal reflection. If a donor thinks that an organization would be good at doing a certain program or achieving certain results, and it might be a little bit outside of what the organization has already established as their impact, that's an opportunity as well to reflect on what the impact statement is and whether or not interest in that new project should cause some sort of shift or deeper reflection about impact overall as an organization. So that's another way that I've also seen that reflection be spurred by other events. I'll give you just maybe 15 more seconds, then we can share this poll. All right. So it looks
All
like
right.
here.
A lot of bottlenecks. The one that's standing out is increasing internal expertise. It's interesting because I think it relates to one of the tips that I didn't really emphasize, is that you have to do this together. So the entire organization has to be involved, and it also means that you have to bring on board indeed expertise. Funding is also big. I think in the previous webinar, I also gave an example of how you can attract funding, particularly for impact measurement. Maybe if you want to know more of that, you can also look back the other webinar that has a few tips on that towards the end of the webinar. Time is also frequently mentioned. That's also interesting to see because it means that willingness is there, expertise might be there, but people need to do stuff. So I always say you can start with a quite limited amount of time on this impact journey and extend over time. So taking the first step, you don't need to block 1 year for 2 or 3 FTE. You just have to start exploring it in tiny steps, and then you can gradually build out your impact measurement over time in order to avoid that you don't get started because of time constraints.
Yeah, and you just to emphasize to that point that it is, starting the journey it doesn't necessarily, I think it's important to put in goals about when you'd like your impact statement to be drafted, but recognize that in order to get buy-in within your organization, that it'll likely take some time. So recognizing that is a part of the process and a really valuable one too.
Definitely.
So I think
I saw that Yeah, I saw that there were no further questions asked in the chat, but if you have any questions after the webinar that pop up, or you watched the other webinar that was recorded 2 weeks ago, and you have questions about that, please drop me an email. I'm happy to reflect with you on these questions and potential answers on those. So feel free to reach out to me on this email address.
Yeah, thank you, Martin. And yes, here's the schedule of our upcoming additional webinars that will focus on MEL topics. So you'll have an opportunity to register if you're interested. At the end of this webinar, a box will come up for that. You know, we do have this impact journey guide that we'll be sending you by the end of this week. So you'll get a chance to review that. And again, if you have questions, feel free to reach out to Martin. And we'd love to see you at additional webinars. We'll also be scheduling some Q&A sessions with me and Martin and some other members of the MEL team at different points during this summer. So you can also think about bringing your questions there. We would love to see you. So I think if there aren't any additional questions, what we'll do, we have a very brief evaluation poll in line on theme with monitoring, evaluation, and learning. We love to hear from you about whether or not this training met your expectations. So I'm going to, so you have here, how would you rate this webinar, 1 through 10?
Yes, and maybe it's
really
good to mention that
everybody's
maybe it's good to mention that after the closure of this webinar, you are asked to also submit a small evaluation form, a bit more extended than this one, which will further help us to improve the quality of our webinar. So thanks in advance also for filling that out.
Yeah, any feedback that you can provide. Our aim is to continue to refine and improve the information that we're providing to individuals within this field. So your feedback is really helpful for us in that. Great. Well, that's all we have prepared for you all today. It was, you know, it was nice getting to share this time with you, and Martin, thank you so much for all the expertise that you shared. Again, you can find us on our website, on LinkedIn, different social media. Also, you'll find Martin's email address as well on this presentation. Martin, I don't know if you have any final words. Thanks so much.
Bye-bye.